Hello, I'm Chuck Wolf, Chief Executive for Charles J. Wolf Associates, LLC. As a motivational speaker and a leadership consultant and executive coach and trainer, I often work with very successful people in their companies. Since many can't afford a professional, I volunteer to host a radio talk show called The Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel, on a nonprofit community radio station in Bridgeport, Connecticut, WPKN. My reason for doing the show is to share with as many people as possible this wonderful process for helping people manage their own emotions and their relationships with others. My goal is for everyone listening to learn to use the Emotion Roadmap to make life better. As you listen to me, help others, I hope you are also learning. As a Simsbury resident, I'm delighted to be able to make the show available through Simsbury TV. To learn more, go to my website, www.emotionroadmap.com. Thank you for listening and watching.
Hi, this is Chuck Wolf, and you're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM, listener-supported radio in Bridgeport, Connecticut. That's where the show originates from, but because of the COVID virus, I'm actually in my home office talking to you from Simsbury, Connecticut. So I want to thank everybody who has been listening on a regular basis to the show. And normally, as you know, the show is a call-in, and I missed the opportunity to engage with listeners who want to call in and share a concern that they have with me that they'd like me to address. And so I'd like to take this time to encourage you, even though we can't talk by phone, to email me at cjwolfe@cjwolfe.com. If you email me about a concern that you have, I'll be able to address it. You don't have to, give me your real name, because sometimes people are uncomfortable sharing who they are on the radio. So you can make a name up, use your first name, whatever you choose. But if you care to share something and you'd like my support and help, and try to understand how the concept of an emotion roadmap can really be helpful to you in addressing the need that you have, I'm happy to take that on and try to do that virtually, if you will. In the meantime, I've had the pleasure, real distinct pleasure, of having the opportunity to talk with a host of friends and colleagues and people I've met in the field of emotional intelligence in Zoom interviews, which have been great. I'm posting them, by the way, on YouTube. If you look up YouTube Emotion Roadmap, you'll find a number of the shows that I've recently put on the radio as audios, also in the Zoom format as an interview that you can see on YouTube. I want to talk a bit about what it feels like to be living with uncertainty. Some of you may know that I belong to a consortium for research on emotional intelligence in organizations. And that consortium has a lot of really top thinkers in the field who are doing a lot of research around the emotional impact of many things, really. And so we often have really interesting speakers who have done some incredible studies that really advance what we know about the topic of emotional intelligence. And some of what we've discovered is that many of the different speakers have the same topic that they talk about, which is, what is it that we need to be great at in the future? And they talked about adaptability, and they talked about resilience, and they spoke about it because whether it's been technological or otherwise, we're seeing enormous quantum leaps in what's changing around us. To go back to Star Trek for a moment, if you were an early fan and had seen the original show, you remember that people could talk to each other with their communicators, they called them. They looked like little flip phones that were the initial smartphone that Motorola came out with, I believe, was one of the first to have a flip phone. That's a long time ago. But the idea now that we get upset, this I think I find amusing, is that we get upset when we're in our cars, driving along, talking to somebody 3,000, 5,000, 8,000 miles away in our cars. with no wires. And we get mad when the signal's dropped. Think about that. We get mad when we lose the signal and we're talking to somebody thousands and thousands of miles away. Unheard of not too many years ago. The whole idea of smartphone technology first talked about in Star Trek. Or maybe Dick Tracy had a watch he talked to. For those of you older, remember the Dick Tracy cartoons. But the reality of having smartphones, little computers, that when we want to know something, we talk to Siri, we talk to Google, we talk to whatever it is that is an assistant on our phone. Through artificial intelligence, the world is at our fingertips for answers that we couldn't have gotten without trying to get to a library, to an encyclopedia, not so many years ago. So with all that change, you'd think we'd be adapting better. We know it's important to be adaptable. We know it's important to be resilient. But a pandemic hit. And perhaps we could have done better if we'd known more. Early on, China had problems with this vaccine in Wuhan. And it is pretty much, I think, unforgivable that they allowed planes to leave Wuhan and fly all over the world without communicating that they had a contagious and possibly deadly disease that was created in their country. So perhaps if we'd known more, we might have done better, but we didn't. What's past is past. But we have to find ways to deal with what is. And what is right now is we are in the throes of an amazing, complex form of virus. It doesn't behave like many viruses before it. In some ways, yes, it does. In other ways, very unique. And so our response to it has been trial and error in many cases. At first, we were told masks matter, then masks don't matter, and then masks do matter. Then we were told that social distancing is critical. And then we were told that social distancing isn't quite so critical if you're outdoors, very critical if you're indoors. So the rules of engagement, if you will, have changed a bunch of times. And what we thought might just take weeks to deal with, and we all thought, well, we're tough enough to last a few weeks. And we're smart enough to figure this out. And we'll be on top of this within at least a month, maybe at the outset too. But we started to shut things down in our economy, our schools, our universities, our workplaces. And change was thrust upon us in ways that no one could have seen coming. In some ways, there's silver linings. The silver linings are less travel, less plane flights, less cars, less trains, less buses. And we're seeing sights we haven't seen before. Mountains that were hidden by fog and smoke and smog cleared up so you can see things clearly now that have been hidden for a very long time. The quality of air has improved substantially. Many of us are out walking and hiking in woods and in many ways doing more hikes than we've done in many, many years before, if we're fortunate enough to live in a place where we have access to that. So, I mean, there have been some silver linings, but there's been a lot of really awful things that have happened too. People who were stuck in hospitals, attached to ventilators, were told that they couldn't have their loved ones be with them at the time of their passing. For a long time, and still now, people feel like they can't hug their relatives, their children, their grandchildren, their sons, daughters, parents. Neighbors were told that they really couldn't gather and play together. Sports were postponed and stopped. We've had a host of things that have been problematic, some, as I said, awful. And we struggle at times with our inability to relate to one another in confined spaces without much or of any kind of outlet for our feelings of anger, of sadness, of depression, even rage that this is happening. People who have fought hard to create businesses have seen them go bankrupt. People have lost jobs, they've lost incomes, they've lost loved ones. There's great sadness in our land and across our planet. So when you listen to my show, The Emotion Roadmap, take the wheel and control how you feel. How are you supposed to feel? How do you want to feel? How do you create those feelings? How do you do that? So I've tried over the last several months to bring you really interesting, even compelling at times, stories, great stories about people using emotional intelligence in a variety of ways to make life better for themselves, for their companies, for their countries. So let me share a few of those stories today. Let me tell you about a few things I think that might brighten your day a bit. One of my good friends, actually a cousin of my wife's, was somebody a couple of years ago who was diagnosed with 2 different types of cancer at the same time. He was someone that was really, really funny, animated, loved life. He was actually an award-winning principal before he retired in the New York area. He was someone with grandchildren and children and friends and community who just one day woke up and found his tongue get swelled and he couldn't speak and he was having a hard time mouthing the words. The thoughts he was having would come out in a way that people couldn't understand what he was saying. And at first, we joked with him, tried to lighten the load a bit, thinking it was just something that would pass. But unfortunately, it was cancer, 2 different types of cancer. And at moments after the diagnosis, as he was getting treatment and trying to fight back against cancer, he's always been a fighter. He's always been someone that was competitive, would work hard to win in any contest. And that's how he treated cancer. He was going to beat it, he believed. But like anyone who's faced that horrible disease, there were dark moments, moments where it doesn't feel like you're winning, moments where you feel like you're losing and you may not make it. And one of the things that he told me was, he said, Chuck, something happened during those moments. I remembered what you taught about the emotion roadmap. I remembered the idea that I had control over my feelings. I could plan what I wanted to feel. I remembered what I learned working at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, he said, because he did that too. I remembered how to regulate, understand, label, express my emotions. I learned to recognize what I was feeling, express how I was feeling, understand how I was feeling, and from your roadmap, I learned how to change how I was feeling. I learned that, and it served me so well during my darkest moments. It helped me get through certain nights that I didn't know if I was going to get up the next morning. And as I talked to him about it, I said, maybe one day you'd like to come on my show and share your story. And one day he will. I'm certain of it. But he also told me that he felt that maybe this is something that could be helpful to other people. He and I started to talk about that. And I said, I wonder if I offered the program where I teach people, I take a deep dive into emotional intelligence in some of the programs that I do, where I teach people how to use the emotion roadmap and a test of emotional intelligence. And one of the things that I began to think about was I wondered if I could invite other people not to learn how to give a test of emotional intelligence, but to learn about their own abilities around emotional intelligence and how those abilities and how the emotion roadmap might help them deal with extremely challenging diseases that they were encountering, that they were experiencing, where they had dark nights and times. And so one of the people I became acquainted with was this woman in Texas who had been misdiagnosed a number of years ago with something other than cancer, and then later found she had cancer. So she was obviously pretty unhappy with what happened and the way it had happened. And that's another story. But when I listened to her and I listened to how she fights back against cancer to this day, she's not in remission, like my friend is, by the way, who is in remission and seems to be beating cancer. But I invited this woman to take part with me in one of the courses where I teach about this emotion roadmap. And I said, I can't promise you this will help, but I think you're really a smart person. I think you're a fighter and you're trying as hard as you can to win this battle. And I think this might be some tools that will really help you. And I can't promise you it will lead you to victory over cancer, but I can tell you it will help you with how you feel each day and how you feel about what happened and how you feel about the disease. And in that, I can promise you it will make some difference. And so she decided to join me in one of the opportunities where I work with a small group, and she's been meeting with me regularly over the summer. And I have to tell you that she is thrilled that she's done this. And I am thrilled with the outcome. The cancer hasn't been beaten. She's not in remission. She's dealing with the same thing she was before the program started, but she is so much more in control of how she feels. And she thought before this all started, as many people do, by the way, that she understood what it meant to be emotionally intelligent, that she got that you can influence your emotions, that she could impact how she was feeling. She felt she knew a lot of that, but she was convinced after getting to know me that maybe I knew some things she didn't. And what could it hurt? Cost her a few dollars and some time. But if it possibly helped at all, my God, would it be worth it? So she took a risk and a shot at doing something with me. And I want to just tell you, not to advertise my programs, because that's not what this is about. But if you can find some ways through anything that you do for free, which all my shows, my radio show, the reason I do my radio show is to try and help all of you be more emotionally intelligent. So if you listen regularly and you try to apply it to a disease that you're experiencing, maybe it'll help you too. So I wanted to share that story because I find it really uplifting, and I'm hopeful that I can find some ways to do more of this, not just with me, but with others who learn what the emotion roadmap potentially can do for anyone who's dealing with disease, whether it's mental, traumatic stress, whether it's physical, whether it's cancer or some other debilitating disease. If you can learn how to take more control over your own emotions, understand how change works for you, I think that's a gift that keeps giving. Because not only can you learn to do this for yourself, I believe, what I've tried to do is communicate this to all my children, to my loved ones, so that they're learning how to do this for themselves and that they're teaching their children how to do it themselves. And I'm hoping everybody learns how to do this. This discovery of this idea of an emotion roadmap came about, as many of you have listened regularly to this show know, as a result of working with some of the real pioneers in emotional intelligence. If you know anything about emotional intelligence, you probably know the name Dan Goleman. And I've gotten friendly with Dan over the years. I actually got to teach in a program of his last September, actually, in Vienna, which was a wonderful experience. Dan has a new coaching certification program that's a couple of years old, and I got to be one of his early faculty for that. And it was an amazing experience. But my point in telling you about Dan is that Dan popularized this idea of emotional intelligence in 1995 when he wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence, Why It Might Matter More Than IQ. Now, Dan was not a researcher per se. He was a writer, a really excellent writer, and a psychologist, a Harvard-educated psychologist. And what Dan was doing around the time the book was published was he was writing for the science edition of the New York Times. And what he would do is he would capture other people's writings or research, and he would bring them to the attention of New York Times readers in the field of psychology. So at one point, he discovered an article that was written by Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer. Now, Peter Salovey at the time was the department chairperson of psychology at Yale University, and Jack Mayer was a very good friend of his who is now a University of New Hampshire professor of psychology. And what they discovered was that there was a sense that they felt, that they discovered in the laboratories, that there might be, and actually appeared to be, a new intelligence. Something really different than general intelligence. It wasn't the same as the multiple intelligence that Howard Gardner had written about a few years before in the 1980s. It was, in fact, it seemed distinctly about emotional intelligence. And they identified several branches of this intelligence that they later became able to measure. These branches were called perception, or identification of emotion. In other words, can somebody who has the ability to identify or perceive emotions in others, to what degree do they have that ability? And to what degree are they able to identify in themselves or perceive in themselves their own emotional states? With what degree of accuracy? See, if we look at something as an ability, then we know that there are people that are going to be really good at it, maybe even great at it, a few people. Some will be average at it. Some will be below average, and some will be really poor. That's how we think about abilities. You think about math abilities or verbal abilities or spatial abilities. Those are the things typically measured in general intelligence. But for emotional intelligence, Peter and Jack felt that there were other dimensions that were separate. And there were identification of emotions, use of emotions, which I'll talk more about in a minute, understanding emotions, how emotions work, what causes emotions, how to change emotions, and finally, how to manage emotions. So we've all sort of, at different times in our life, thought about what we're feeling. Everybody's done that at different points. Everybody's tried to understand why they're feeling the way they are, perhaps why somebody else is feeling the way he or she is. So we've thought about identifying feelings and understanding feelings. And certainly there are times when we've all felt how important it is to manage our feelings. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes not so much, right? And also, we've all tried, I think, from time to time, to influence how someone else is feeling. Now, that's all seems somewhat reasonable, I would suspect, to all of you who are listening. But the use of emotions, and this is really exciting to me because I love this idea, involves the idea that emotions facilitate our thoughts and our behaviors. Now, we don't often connect the dots that way. So let me say that again. Emotions facilitate the thoughts we have. If I'm feeling happy, it creates a certain kind of thought that is related to happy feelings. It creates a certain kind of behavior that's related to happy feelings. If I'm sad, then I often will be thinking sad thoughts, perhaps behaving in a way that shows my sadness. So one idea of use is that emotions facilitate our thoughts and behaviors. That was kind of fascinating to me. Also, I learned when I got to work with Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer back in the late 1990s, which is when I started to get involved in this field. And my work with them, I'll explain in a moment. But when I started to work with them, one of the things that I learned was that emotions have a purpose that sometimes helps us to achieve the objectives or goals that we have. And sometimes emotions keep us. Think about that. Sometimes emotions keep us from achieving certain goals and objectives. Think about that for a minute, because that's really a different way of thinking about our emotions. And most people don't think this way. Well, this is unique, and this is what my show's been about. So if you're a regular listener, and I want to thank everybody who's a regular listener, I really appreciate everybody that tunes in. But if you're a regular listener, you know that I've said that emotions have a purpose. Often, according to Charles Darwin many years ago, emotions were part of our evolutionary system that helped us to survive. Like if we heard a noise in the forest, we'd know we needed to possibly run, unless we were out in the forest purposely hunting, at which point we needed to know that we needed to turn and use our weapons to try to create and generate food for ourselves by killing some animal that we were going to bring to our families so we could eat. But our emotions were part of our survival system. And so our emotions often will tell us, or at least inform us, that something's happening. And if we attend to our emotions, we can try to understand, what are they trying to tell us? Now, that sounds really useful, but we're not in the forest so much anymore. And we're not hunting down our food so much anymore, right? Life is really different. So things that might have made us angry and wanted to fight in the past, we can't always fight if we're in an organizational setting and somebody or something makes us mad. It isn't kill or be killed. It's how do we get along with this person who just said something that's very upsetting to me? How do I do that? When I feel like the initial thought around something that's upsetting is, do I have to fear this? Do I have to run from this? Do I have to escape from this? Or is this something I'm going to have to fight with? One way is looking at this, is this something that's going to eat me, or is this something I'm going to eat? Well, in the workplace, that might metaphorically work, but it doesn't really work. So one of the things that we've learned is, and again, from Peter and Jack's work and others, is that the emotions we feel are often informing us about something, but what they're informing us about might not be helpful. Like, for instance, we may have developed a fear as a child of angry responses. We have grown up perhaps in an alcoholic setting where either mom or dad or both were alcoholics who often screamed at one another, and things got out of control, maybe even hit one another. So we've learned maybe as young children to fear anger, intensely fear anger. And if that's been the case, then maybe we still feel anger, but it's not rational anymore because we're grown up. We don't have to be afraid. We're able to manage even angry situations. And in the workplace, when somebody's angry, you don't run from that. You try to understand, are they legitimately angry? Is there a just cause that's caused them to feel this way? I mean, look at what's happening in our world today. We have people unbelievably sad and upset, enraged, angry about what's happening in our cities. And some for different reasons, right? I mean, there's the Black Lives Matter movement because of shootings by policemen of Black men, typically, in situations that seem really uncalled for, or maybe not shootings, but just the George Floyd case. Horrible, right? So there's people who are really reacting to a horrible situation, and it's a legitimate reason for the anger, right? Then there are people who are really reacting angrily, not just to the shootings that have happened, but to the actual repercussions of those shootings. Because then there are people that are really angry that with the response, that when people who are upset about Black lives being lost then go into cities and create havoc and ruin communities where many of them are Black people who have got businesses that they spent their lives creating, or people defending their businesses who have lost their lives, have been injured because of people who are so upset that they just break out into violent behavior. So there are people really upset about that too. And again, that sounds like a just cause too. So we've got lots of anger, feeling lots of things. But does anger lead to resolution? I think anger causes us to step back and take notice. But at some point, we have to get to the place where we're talking about what can we do to make things better? How do we get to the feelings that are going to help us to really make things better? How do we do that? What do we need to feel? And that's a key question that comes from this use of emotion. Now, why I love this idea of the use of emotion is that in that setting, when we think about how are we feeling and how do we want to feel, it becomes incredibly important to think about what would be ideal to feel. If I could wake up tomorrow morning feeling exactly the way I need to feel to make things better, because I know what feelings are going to help me to be more thoughtful, more effective, and generate the kind of solutions that are going to make our communities, our cultures, our neighborhoods safer, more peaceful, more tolerant, more inclusive, better for all of us. What feelings are going to help us to achieve that? Now, anger serves its purpose in getting all of us to attend to this stuff. Again, it's a survival mechanism. Anger is a legitimate reason for paying attention to an injustice, of which there are many, unfortunately. But how do we work with that? How do we do something different? How do we find solutions? So I'm not a genie that can magically create a solution. But what I can tell you is that when we all pay attention to our feelings, if we can generate inner peace, as we're struggling with the idea that we want to create world peace, safety and peaceful neighborhoods, both in our rural areas, in our suburban areas, and in our inner cities. That we don't want safe spaces just for one group of people. We want safety and security, calmness and peace for everyone in our world. What do we need to feel to make that happen? So I think, based on the science of emotion at least, that some sadness helps us to pay attention to detail. Some openness, some happiness, some excitement and engagement allows us to brainstorm and to be creative. But when we start to move from being creative, where we have lots of wonderful ideas, most of which probably won't work, but some will, when we can prioritize and decide what's going to make us better, what's really going to gain us, the kind of solutions that are going to serve us, serve all of us. What is going to make that happen? How do we do that? And I think the emotion roadmap is one of the pieces of the puzzle. So the use of emotion is this idea that we want to plan emotionally how we want to feel. So all of you that are struggling with the pandemic, with COVID, with the injustice, with trying to understand, is Black Lives Matter a movement that we want to support? Certainly Black Lives Matter. Everyone should want to support that. What about Blue Lives Matter? Is that a movement we want to support? Certainly the people that are in law enforcement, for the most part, and most people get this, most of those people that go to work every day with the idea that they've joined a law enforcement society where they want to bring peace and safety to the people that they care about, that they love, to their neighborhoods, to their communities. Those are good people. So blue lives matter. Everybody's lives matter. We get that. But we need to spend some time thinking about Black Lives Matter in a way that's holistic, that's synergistic, that brings all of us together, right? That brings us all together. So, and the unfortunate thing is that we get caught up in semantics, and we think that if we're not working every day to change the world, that somehow we're not really part of the solution, we're part of the problem. But so many of us just try to survive the day, right? We're just trying to get along. We're trying to feed our families. We're trying to clothe our children. We're trying to pay for our housing. So we got a roof over our head. So we're not cold in the winter and also not hot in the summer. So we can have the kind of luxurious life that all of us want for every one of our children, our loved ones, and really we should want for each person on this planet. How do we do that? So the idea of use of emotion in this model is incredibly exciting. It's what the emotion roadmap's about, really. When you ask yourself at some point when you're stuck, and this is when people begin to use the emotion roadmap, is when you're stuck often, is because you don't know what to do. You really are uncertain what to do, as are many people right now about this virus. What do we do? I mean, one of the things that I do that helps me to cope is we have a phone call most nights every week with FaceTime Messenger. If you have Facebook, you can have FaceTime Messenger, and on your phones, you can talk to your family members anywhere that they have access to a signal for their smartphone or to the internet. Because when you access that, you can talk to them with video. So you can see them. One of my daughters was on the phone with us tonight, and as she stepped out of her house to go for a walk while she was talking to us, I felt like I was in her neighborhood, and she's in New Jersey and I'm in Connecticut. And so I was able to visualize what it felt like when I actually am at their house, walking out the door with her. My other daughter was walking where she lives in another town in Connecticut. My other daughter was sitting outdoors where she lives in another town in Connecticut. So one of the things that's joyous is that we can share our day. We can talk about how we're feeling. And because we see each other much more regularly than we used to, when we used to travel back and forth to see one another, but because we're on the phone a lot, we're pretty much up to date with each other's lives in ways that we weren't before. So that's a blessing. That's one of the things that helps us cope with COVID and the uncertainty and unpredictability of what's going on in our lives about when we can see each other again. Let me tell you another story I think that's uplifting. Is we had a vacation schedule where we were going to, all as a family, go up to the White Mountains in New Hampshire. But the place we were going to generates quite a crowd. And, we believe in masks and wearing masks and social distancing. And I get that there are people that don't. And I understand that some of the science says that you don't really need it as badly when you're outdoors. But we still, anytime we're around people, we've got a mask on. And others don't. So if we were going to be going to a crowded place, we thought, that makes no sense. That really doesn't make any sense for us to go to a crowded place. We've been really being careful about quarantining ourselves and keeping away from most people, the social distancing. That resonates with us. We work at that. That's important. But I get that other people make other choices. And I'm not part of the police, about the mask police. I mean, I'm annoyed if I'm hiking on a trail and people who aren't wearing masks don't move over to the other side if we happen to encounter them. That bothers me. And at times I've spoken out a bit about that. Mostly I try really hard to be nice about it, but not everybody's, even if you're trying to be nice, is appreciative of you calling them out when you do this. But mostly my wife and I, when we're out hiking, we'll just walk over to the side and wait for others to pass. I hope that they symbolically understand we're walking to the side, that they will as well. And most people are great about it, honestly. Every once in a while, you run into somebody who isn't. But the story I want to tell you that's uplifting, I think, is our daughters and I. We have 3 daughters, and they all have husbands. Two of the daughters of the 3 have children, and we were again hoping to go to a vacation together, but it didn't make sense to go to vacation where there was going to be a lot of people around us. So we talked about it. We said, well, I wonder if there's a farmhouse that we might find instead. And some of our daughters are really incredibly talented in search and understanding how to use smartphone technology and searching the internet. So one of our daughters, within hours of this conversation, found an amazing farmhouse. It was in the mountains in Vermont, and it was not the Green Mountains of Vermont, and it wasn't the White Mountains in New Hampshire, but it was right on the sort of the border of Vermont and New Hampshire, and in the mountains. Didn't really have a name for those mountains, but it was in the mountains. And the farmhouse had like a couple other properties on the farm property, but it had 580 acres. It had a lake. It was a private lake. They had trails, hiking trails that went up into meadows on top of mountains. We'd be pretty high up where we were. And then with about a 1.5 mile walk up into the mountain, we would come across a meadow, and we would have amazing views where we were. We could actually, on top of that meadow, see Mount Washington in the distance. On our right and on our left, we could see the Green Mountains of Vermont. So it was spectacular hiking. And the meadow itself that we walked in, all around the farmhouse, was alive with grasshoppers and butterflies and birds and wildflowers, and they actually had 2 horses that some of you know I have my own horse, and I know horse behavior, and these 2 horses were like best buddies. I mean, they were constantly beside each other in the fields. Every time we looked out any of the windows in the farmhouse, we could see the 2 horses together, grazing, nuzzling each other, sweeping away the flies with their tails on each other. So it was really a very, very beautiful place. And it had a lake, and the lake had a boat, and it had a kayak, and it had a paddleboard, and it had a raft, and you could swim in the lake. So this was a place we decided we would go, and we were able to get 5 nights, 6 days. Someplace we could all drive to, so we could be safe about it. And once we drove, and once we got there, I mean, one of my son-in-laws did go out to a grocery store one time. He wanted to get some food. But all the rest of us, we didn't get in our cars. We just stayed in that farmhouse. Had plenty of bedrooms, plenty of bathrooms, a big kitchen. We had internet service, and some of the family members had to work while we were there for different days and different parts of the day. And that was it. We had rooms where we could do that. We walked down. It was like a 10, 15-minute walk through the woods and through the meadows to get to the lake. And we did all the boating and kayaking and paddleboarding. And we didn't wear masks because we were just with each other. We didn't see other people. And it felt sort of like BC time or before COVID. It really felt what we used to call normal. And plus, we could hug each other. The way we all decided to do this was some of us could quarantine for 2 weeks before we went, and we did. And others who couldn't quarantine took the COVID-19 test and tested negative before they came up. So none of us had the disease. We knew that. And so we could do all these wonderful things together. So it's another nice story to try and say that, there may be ways that you too can find a way to be with your loved ones by being creative and taking some time to do some research and think about where you want to go and what kind of place you might enjoy where you feel safe and comfortable. So that's another, I hope, uplifting story for you. The other thing I'll tell you is that I am finding that this idea of trying to be more emotionally thoughtful is really important because we're spending so much time with the people we love, but we haven't spent the kind of time we're spending with them that we have these last few months. And so you hear the statistics, you know that domestic abuse is up. We know that not everybody gets along really well with each other. And so I'm hopeful that not only do you listen to this show, but you're doing the things that work for you. And remember, if you want to plan how you want to feel, how do you want to feel as much and as often as you can? It seems to me what feelings would be ideal during these times is you want to feel loving towards the people in your household, towards your family members that you see only on Zoom, to your neighbors, to anyone that you might be able to do a favor for. You want to feel loving and supportive and caring. You also want to feel helpful. You want to feel like you're making a difference somehow. So maybe if you don't cook and somebody's been cooking for you, you decide to watch a YouTube video and figure out how maybe you can make a meal. I don't typically cook, but I've made a few meals, probably not as many as my wife might like, but I've done a little bit of that. But I also am trying really hard to be an effective listener. Now, I listen for a living, right? I've been a psychologist, a therapist, a leadership coach, and so listening is, I mean, it's easy for me when I'm working. But to listen when I'm just living every day, every moment, at the level that I'm capable of, that's not easy. That's something I have to really decide I want to do and that I'm going to do. And so I have worked at being a better listener at home, fully listening. I mean, you know, when you listen to a story, if you've been around somebody for a long time and you know the stories they want to tell, and you really, you sort of can maybe finish some of their sentences for them as they can finish your sentences for you as well. And they know what you want to talk about. And, you know, at times you feel like, you know, I'm not that interested. But you just got each other. Or you just got the few people in your home to listen to each of you to listen to each other. Give that some special effort, everybody. Make sure you're fully listening. I know we want to jump in with our own thoughts and what we want to talk about, and it's not always the same. But let me say that it is a gift when you fully listen to another person all the way through. When you ask them, thank you for telling me that. Is there anything else you wanted to say about that? So I think I got it. And then sometimes repeat back to them what you heard. You don't have to do that, but sometimes it's helpful for you to just say, so this is what I understood from that conversation we just had. What was important to you about it? What matters to you? If it's a problem to be solved, that's one of the things that I found that many people really like to solve problems. We're really involved with solving problems in ways that maybe we shouldn't be all the time. Have you ever tried to solve somebody's problem and have them say, no, that won't work? Because so many of us have jumped into conversations. I know I've done this a lot in the past, not so much these days, but in the past, somebody would say, this is what's going on for me. This is what I'm feeling. This is what, I'm really trying to do this differently. And I'd say, well, you want to do it differently? Let me tell you how to do it differently. And then I'd say something that, what's interesting is what you think to say. And this isn't just what I'm saying, but what most of us think to say is what may already be obvious to the person who's had the problem and thought about it for a while. And the first thing that comes to our mind that seems like would be a solution may have been something that's already been dismissed by the person with the problem. Does that occur to you? And if it does, how do you avoid making the mistake of jumping in and saying, hey, this is what I think you should do, and being told that, no, I already thought about that, that won't work. And then you feel like you got to argue with them about why it will work. That's not a particularly helpful conversation to have. So let me just tell you about that, and then I'll close. One of the things that I think is a real gift, every once in a while I talk about this on my show, is what I learned many years ago as a therapist, which was, hey, I'm listening to you. I've heard what you're saying. I understand the themes in your life that are problematic. and I can tell you exactly what you need to do. So let me do that. And I would tell people exactly what they need to do. And what was interesting was most of the time, and I don't mean to be bragging, but most of the time I was right, only the timing was wrong. And if your timing is wrong, even when you have the right solution for somebody, they can't hear it. Not only can't they can't hear it, they get scared of it because something inside them isn't ready to change yet. They don't really want to change. They're beginning to explore the possibility of doing something different, and they know they need to change, but they're not ready yet. And when you announce to them that you get what's going on inside their heads in ways that they didn't feel like they really told you, I was good at this. I am good at this. I am good at understanding what's going on inside somebody's head. And I can really determine what the voices are saying to that person. But I also know that those voices, they aren't going away quickly or easily. They don't want to be defeated. They're there for a reason that maybe made sense many years ago when they were children, but they're there and they're not going away without a fight. As a therapist, what I'd learned was that I needed to explain to the person I was talking to my client, the person I was offering therapy to, that, hey, there's something going on that you and I need to be on the same side against something that's part of you. And you and I together, we can defeat that problem that you're having. It's not going to be easy. And you're going to find times when you're away from these conversations we're having where that part of you is going to argue that, no, you don't want to change this. You don't want to get rid of this behavior or these thoughts. That part of you that's been with you for a long time, that wants to survive. But you and I together can make life better for you when we figure out what's going on, why it's going on, and how we can change to something that's much better and much healthier for you going forward. That's therapy. But in our normal conversations, you're not doing that. What you're trying to do, and what I suggest you do when you're trying to help somebody with a problem they're having, what I suggest is this. Simply ask them when they're done talking, and you've got the problem, and you can restate the problem effectively. So what are you thinking about doing? Is there anything you thought about but already dismissed? What makes the most sense now as far as going forward? Find out where they're starting from, what they've already considered, what they've dealt with and dismissed, so you don't go there. Find out what they're considering. And if they're considering something that makes some sense to you, ask, can I help you build on that? That sounds like a good idea. So what concerns you about that? And what do you think will make that work? And what might hold you back? And then see if you can help them that way. But ask permission. If they've got nothing, if they really don't know, if they're really looking to you to offer a solution, ask permission. Ask them, you know what? If you don't really have anything that you're thinking about doing, just listening to you, hearing about what you already thought about, and thinking maybe you haven't considered this yet, would you like to know some thoughts I'm having that potentially might be useful to you? And if they say, nah, not really, I just felt like talking about it, but thanks for offering. You might be really disappointed, but it's better to know that they're really not interested in the solution right now than offering one when it isn't really welcome. But if they say to you, yeah, I'd really like to hear what you have to say, and say, well, knowing that you didn't want to do this because it didn't make sense to you, I understand why you said that. And knowing that you haven't got any other ideas, how about these ideas? I've got a few, and let me toss out what I think might be the best one, but I've got a few ideas that I'll share with you, and then if it resonates with you, we can talk through how it might work. And then see where it goes. It may be that you have a solution that they hadn't thought about and they love you for it, or it could be that you're stuck too and you don't have anything. But you know what? You've given them a gift already just by willing to listen. Really, people appreciate someone really hearing them. I don't mean just listening to the words, but hearing their feelings and hearing and understanding why they're feeling the way they do. Even if you can't resolve the situation for them, that's a gift that you can give. And I hope to be doing that again for you one day. I hope to be back in the studio in the not too distant future, being able to talk about the emotion roadmap, take the wheel and control how you feel, and giving you the number to call in so that we can be talking together. So I hope these couple of uplifting stories I told you about family vacations, about spending time with video chats through Facebook Messenger or one of the apps that you can find on your smartphones. By the way, Facebook Messenger you can do with your laptop computers. They have microphones typically and they have cameras. So you don't need a smartphone if you have a laptop computer. So that's another thing to know about. But I hope that story, the story about trying to be smarter about how you manage your emotions for people with debilitating diseases, I hope that's helpful. But anytime that you're struggling with a family member or yourself who's really having a hard time coping, whether with this virus, racism, social injustice, violence in our cities, going back to school, there's so many things that are really demanding enormous amount of emotional energy that all of us can use help. And one of the best help opportunities we have is to listen deeply with understanding and with empathic caring, really caring about one another and listening fully. And if we can, possibly being helpful. So that's my show. You've been listening to the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. I'm very fortunate and thankful to be on WPKN 89.5 FM in Bridgeport, Connecticut, listener-supported radio. So thank you for supporting my show, for supporting me, and for those of you who are watching on YouTube because of the relationship with Simsbury Community Television. I wish you all well, and I'm proud to be a member of this community also. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week, and I'll be back. The first 2 weeks of the month from 12 to 1 p.m. is when my show airs. Again, it's the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. And I'm Chuck Wolf. Bye-bye now.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.